Onto your hands and knees. And then squat back. And come forward. Increase the space a little between your hands and knees. Bring your hips forward. And keep your spine neutral. And try and lift the chest and the head up as much as you can here. Breathe into the lower abdomen and into the lower back. And squat back from there. Keep the chin tucked in, the neck long, shoulder blades, draw them down the back. And go forward again, back to kneeling plank. And back again. Good. And back to quadruped. You come up off your hands. So you want to feel the support of your hips here. So when you push down with, in this case, your left knee, you want to be able to unweight your right knee. And vice versa, when you push down with your right knee, you want to be able to unweight your left knee. You can keep your left foot on the floor so that you don't lose your balance, but you're just seeing if your hip can support your full weight here. Try to feel what the hip is doing when you do that. Go back to the left leg again, left hip. And once more on the right. And back to the left. And when you feel stable enough, bring your right foot forward. Stretch the arms forward. Raise the right arm, raise the left arm, lower the right. See that when you lift your arm, you're not lifting your rib cage up. Just the opposite. Keep the rib cage connected to the pelvis and keep the shoulder blade anchored down onto the ribs. Then arms forward and step the right foot back. Unweight the left knee. And when you're ready, step the left foot forward. Then lift the right arm, lower the left. So keep the ribs, the right ribs connected to the pelvis on the right. Shoulder blade anchored down onto the ribs from the side and from the back. And arms forward. And step the left foot back, then come back down to quadruped, walk forward into kneeling plank. Make sure your knees are slightly wider than your hips. Then rotating the upper arms out, bend the elbows, lower yourself down. And then lie face down. Put your forehead on the floor, bring your hands above your head, elbows very wide, shoulder blades nice and wide. And breathe into your low back. And try and get the lumbar spine to lift away from the floor. If you find that you simply can't do that, then you can come up, take a blanket or a bolster, and you'd put the support under the pelvis and your abdomen. And then that should pretty well open up the back for you. And you'll get that feeling then of the lumbar spine lifting and opening. And then once you have that feeling, draw the shoulder blades down, anchor the shoulder blades down onto the ribs, and then lift the head a little. Then reach through the crown of the head and synchronize that with the shoulder blades drawing down. And then bring the head down. And again, open up the low back, anchor the shoulder blades, raise the head. Then keeping your low back stable, stretching through the crown of the head, pulling the shoulder blades down the back away from the head, Start to lift the head a little bit higher, but watch very carefully that in lifting the head up, you're not collapsing the lumbar spine down. So use your breath, use your abdominal muscles to maintain intra-abdominal pressure, and use the intra-abdominal pressure to maintain support for your lumbar spine. Watch for tension in the glutes. So go ahead, bring the head down. Completely relax the glutes and hamstrings here. Get all that to turn off. Then lift the spine without tightening glutes and hamstrings. And anchor the shoulder blades, lift the head again. So now you can watch a little more carefully whether, in order to lift the head, you're recruiting your glutes and hamstrings or whether you're not. And you want to do it without recruiting glutes and hamstrings. Right, then bring your hands into a plank position. Press up out of it. So you're back to a kneeling plank. And then bring your hips part way back. Bring your hands a little closer to the knees, couple inches. Turn the toes under. Come up into bear for a moment. And then walk your hands to your feet and squat. And come all the way up from there. Alright, so take your half dome and put your left forefoot on that. Okay, so do a forward bend, but don't go down too low. Keep the spine neutral. And as I was mentioning the other day, the tendency often here is to support the weight of the trunk and the head, which is substantial, with the lumbar spinal muscles, which makes it difficult for you to use your intra-abdominal pressure to do that. So even though ultimately you want the pelvis to tip forward here, sometimes you need to tip it a little bit back so that it opens up the low back, and so you can activate the abdominal muscles a little bit better, and that should feel more, that should help your back feel more supported, and then you can just focus on uprighting the head more. So as far as the low back and the upper body are concerned, you're really doing the exact same things here that you're doing in that prone position that we were doing just a little bit ago. Then when you come up, see that you maintain that stability so the ribs don't pop forward. And then raise the left arm. And same thing with regards to that arm. Don't pull the rib cage up with the arm. Keep the ribs anchored to the pelvis. Keep the shoulder blade anchored to the ribs. And if that means you don't lift the arm as high, that's fine. release that. And switch sides. You got right foot. Try to turn your thigh bones a little more outward here. So you want your arches to lift up. Arms at your sides go forward. Adjust the position of the pelvis so you have support for your low back. And then extend through the crown and keep uprighting the upper part of the spine. So it's like you're doing a forward bend from your hips, but you're doing a back bend with your spine. A back bend in the thoracic area, but not in the lumbar. So you want to keep the lumbar neutral and try to isolate that uprighting motion in the upper part of the spine. And come upright, slowly, carefully. And raise the right arm. Lift the arm without lifting the rib cage with it, without lifting the shoulder blade. And release that. Go back to the left foot. Actually, let's do this. You're going to stand with your feet pelvis width. I'm showing this from the side so it's easier to see. And as you lift up, as you push down through your heels, and you lift up through the crown of your head, reach upward and back with the crown of your head until you feel the chest gets pulled up and you're doing a little bit of a back bend in your chest. And that can be a fairly small back bend. It doesn't have to be a big back bend here. But what's important, in fact, what's essential, is that the lumbar spine remains supported. So you want to feel, again, what you were feeling in your 3 months prone position. You want to feel the lumbar spine is being supported posteriorly, so it opens to the back of the body. And as you're maintaining that, you're creating a back bend in the upper part of the chest, upper part of the spine. So you have to be able to pay attention to both those things. And like in 3 months prone, you want to avoid clenching your glutes or tightening your hamstrings to support your back. If you feel like you have to do that, then just back way off. All right, so we'll come back to that. Put your left foot on the half dome again. Then raise the left arm. Same thing, don't emphasize the height of the arm as much as you emphasize ribs down, shoulder blade anchored. Then support with the right arm and side bend to your right. So you're stretching that left side just gradually at first. You want to breathe into the right side because that side tends to collapse. And with practice, you'll begin to feel this stretch all the way down through the pelvis into the hip. Keep the chin in, keep the crown of the head lifted, and turn your head and look to your left. And come up and release. And switch legs. So right arm. And side bending to the left. So just like with the back bend or really any posture that we do, you're always monitoring, do I have the stability to keep my spine safe as I introduce these asymmetrical postures. Chin in, crown of the head lengthening, head turns to the right. Good, and come up and release. All right, then we'll repeat that back bending posture. So make sure you feel the weight in your heels here. You don't want to be pushing your hips out in front of your ankles. So anchor straight down, then lift up, stretch with the crown of the head. You can also think of lifting up through the flank of the body where you were just stretching. And then gradually you can bend back as you're able. Keep the glutes relaxed, hamstrings relaxed. Use your breath, use your intra-abdominal pressure, use your abdominal muscles to support. Hold that for a few breaths. And then come back to neutral. So we'll do one more of those. I also like to use this hand position sometimes. In fact, sometimes I'll even put my hands, I'll stand near a wall, put my hands on a wall so I have something to push into. And what that does is that push, that action of pushing, helps me to activate my trunk stabilizers more. And then that allows me to generate more range in the bend with the same level or even more level of, even a higher level of support for my low back. And then when you come out of the back bend, reach forward with your arms, draw the lower ribs back, release the tailbone down, and completely unload the lumbar spine with your breath, with your intra-abdominal pressure. And then release the arms. So this is a class that's focusing on back bends, and particularly newer people need to be extra careful that they don't feel like they're doing things that they're not comfortable with. So, you know, if you find that I'm going to try to introduce every pose that I feel is an issue for any of you in stages, so that you can always go back to an initial stage of the posture. So for instance, in this standing back bend, the initial stage of the posture is you're just standing and uprighting through the crown of your head. And then even if you just go slightly back, even if it's just that much where you're barely lifting the sternum up, that's fine. You don't need to do more than that for it to have the benefit that we're looking for. So you want to give yourself time to train your body to be able to do these asymmetrical postures where you're going into extension or you're going into flexion of your spine or bending laterally, because those are the things that are those are the types of postures that are going to challenge you the most when you're, in terms of your ability to keep your trunk stable. All right, stretch your arms forward, take the feet apart, set yourself up in Trikonasana. I'm going to turn to the right first, so your right. You want the right thigh bone rotating out, you're anchored through the back leg, you're lifted through the spine, you're reaching with the arms. Inhale, and then exhale, bending to that right side. You're uprighting the head as you turn it. You want to connect that uprighting action, uprighting of the head, to the stretch or to the anchoring action of your back leg. Again, when done properly, and especially as the front hip and hamstrings get more flexible, you'll start to feel this stretch from the left hip all the way up to the head. Even all the way down into your leg. And come up and reverse that. Make sure your feet are lined up. This slight turn in of the back foot is important. I think a lot of people, I find, fudge on that. Your pelvis will tend to orient with your foot. So if your foot's a little turned out, your pelvis will also tend to turn a little too far to that side. So you want that angle of the foot to reflect that your pelvis is going to turn a little bit toward the front leg here. And again, you're stretching legs, arms, spine, inhaling, and then exhaling, going to that side. Try to keep the knee firm, try to keep the quadriceps, particularly on your left leg, active, so the thigh bone is more stable. And watch that the pelvis doesn't rotate forward, which means doesn't rotate in such a way that you start to feel pressure in your low back. In fact, just the opposite. You want to feel like you're really getting a lot of length and space through the low back, especially on the left side. And then uprighting and turning the head. Try to connect that uprighting of the head with the stretch of the back leg, the right leg in this case. And come up. And turn the feet parallel, step the feet in, release the arms. Good, so we'll do another back bend here. So anchoring, again watch that your hips aren't out in front of the ankles. So you want to anchor straight down, lift straight up at first, and then start to bend back a little. And then you can decide how far you want to go, how far it's appropriate for you to go. So it may be that for some of you, all you do is just this little mini back bend where your sternum comes up a little, your head goes slightly back. That's fine. Right? Eventually, as you get stronger and more used to the posture, you can start to increase the range and even work down into the legs and hips more. And then come up from there. Take a couple breaths. And then one more. And up. Good. So arms forward, feet apart, about 3.5 feet. And then you're turning to your right. So you're in a lunge here with the right foot forward. And you want to get the right thigh bone, right knee rotating a little bit out, and then stabilize that. Then stretch the left arm forward and the left heel back and down. And then start reaching that left arm further forward and gradually upward. See if you can synchronize the stretch of your left leg with the stretch of your left arm. And then if you can, start to sit a little lower with your right hip. You're looking for what is the place, at what point as I come down do I start to feel pressure in my low back. You want to be just shy of that place. Or you want to see if you can use your stabilization, use your intra-abdominal pressure to take the pressure out of your low back and put it back into your hips. Okay, and come up and reverse that. So align the left leg, left thigh bone, left knee here. Stretch the right arm forward. Stretch the right heel back. It's not important, incidentally, for now that that heel actually reaches the floor, so don't focus on that too much. Instead, pay more attention to synchronizing the stretch of your right leg with the stretch of your right arm. And then gradually lift the arm higher. And then see if you can sit a little lower with your left hip. Same thing applies to that lifted arm. Keep the ribs connected to the pelvis. Don't let the ribs follow the arm. The lower you go with your left hip, the harder it is to do that. Right, and come up and turn in and step out. Good. So you can use your squat to come down into quadruped. And then come up off your hands again. And we'll repeat what we did earlier. So arms forward, you're pushing down with your left knee, unweighting your right leg, and then stepping that right foot forward. And then lower the right arm, lift the left. And this time, try introducing a little bit of rotation of your pelvis to the right. So your right hand starts to move toward your left foot, like you're going to reach for your left foot. And then back to the front. Now this is for just for people who can do it, who can do this safely. So if you're not able to do this safely, I don't recommend it. The toes of the left foot under, and you're lifting your knee up. So if that's not safe for you, then don't do that. Right? But if you can, add a couple of those lifts in here. Right? And then you can step out of it. Lower the arms for a moment. And then you're supporting with your right hip, lifting the left knee. Bring the left foot forward. Then lower the left arm, raise the right. And introducing a little bit of rotation of the pelvis to the left. And you'll find your left hand starts to move towards your right foot. So it's almost like your left hand is reaching towards your right foot and your right hand is reaching away from your right foot. So the stretch of the arms is complementing each other. And then back to the front. And if you can, try lifting that right knee up. And if that's not safe for you, don't do it. Otherwise, add 2 or 3 of those lifts in here. And then go ahead and step the left foot back. And bring your hands down. And go to quadruped. And in quadruped, breathe into the low back. And let your breath recover for a moment. Come up. So you're in a kneeling position. You want to pretend as though you had a wall right in front of you. Your knees are right up against that wall. You're going to take the pubic bone and you're going to anchor it to that same wall. And then what we want to do is to rotate the pelvis around that axis. So if the pubic bone is anchored here, we're rotating the pelvis away from the pubic bone or away from that contact point. So you're just tipping the pelvis and the trunk back, being careful not to let the pelvis move backward as you do that. So you're doing a little bit of a back bend here, but what you're doing is basically just a back bend in your hips without taking your spine into a back bend. And that movement, your ability to tip, may be quite limited. That's not unusual. So if it doesn't go very far, don't worry about it. You're trying to figure out what you got there, basically. Take a couple breaths. And then try one more. So you're just fixing the pubic bone, rotating around that axis. Rotating the pelvis, using the weight of the trunk to facilitate that. And you're going to feel here a lot of action in your quadriceps and a lot of action in your abdominal muscles to support that weight. So that's normal and correct. Try not to recruit glutes again here. Use your breath, use your intra-abdominal pressure to support. And come up from there. Okay, so from the kneeling position, instead of stepping the right foot forward like we did before, you're stepping the right foot out to the side. The right heel is lining up approximately with the lower border of your left kneecap. You can keep the toes of the right foot pointing up here. You want to make sure that the weight is still mainly in your left hip. So you don't want to take this right foot so far over that now you've got quite a bit of weight in that right heel. All right, nonetheless, there will be some pressure in that heel. So if you don't have a lot of cushion under it, that can be uncomfortable. So you certainly feel free to cushion it as you see fit. Then stretch the arms forward. Raise the left arm, lower the right. Bring your right hand down onto your right leg. Again, push down with your left knee. Actively load that hip. Rotate the right thigh bone out. Bend from the right hip and to the right as much as you can. So initially this motion is very much like triangle pose, very much like Trikonasana. You're trying to move your pelvis into the position first, and then you can start to add the side bend on top of that. Keep that left hip actively loading. So don't let your left hip collapse to try to give you more range. And come up and bring the right foot in, right knee down. Then unweight the left leg. Step that left leg out to the side. Line the heel up with the lower border of your kneecap. Raise the right arm. Push down through the right knee. Bring the left hand onto the left leg. Then inhale. As you exhale, bend from the left hip. So like Trikonasana, you're bending from the hip, rotating the pelvis first. But then in this pose, Parigasana, we're adding more of a side bend on top of that. Again, watch, there's a tendency with this posture to lose the support of the right hip, where you kind of collapse it to go down lower. You want to make sure you're still pushing down with that right leg. So don't give that up. Good, and come up. And bring the left leg in. And we'll do it once more to the right here. So again, first from the hip, from the pelvis, and then the side bend. You can also upright and turn the head here, where you'd be turning it to the left. And switch sides. And once more to the left. Hips first, and then the side bend. Good, and come up and step in. And release the arms a moment. Okay, so this Ustrasana prep pose that we did before, pubic bone fixed, just tipping the pelvis, just that. So if that's plenty challenging for you, you can stick with that. If you want to go a little further with it, you can add on top of that the back bend in the upper part of the spine. So once I have completed or near completed the back bend in my hips, then I'm going to stretch with the crown of my head and try to extend back from there. Hold that for a few breaths. And then come up from there. So again, I can't emphasize this enough, that to be safe, for some of you, that step one part will be plenty. You'll find that you've got plenty of work to do there. You don't need to be worrying about what's happening in the upper part of the spine. But for people who have more experience, if you can get into the hips pretty well and take the weight back, then as you extend back, you might be able to get your hands to your feet. And then at that point, once you can get some support from your arms, then you can increase the back bend and start to throw the head back more. It should always feel like you're still, the back bend is still initiating from the hips. So you want that connection from the hips all the way up to the crown of the head. And come up. All right, just one more, whichever variation you're working on. Breathe into the back. Keep supporting. And then all the way up. So this sounds very simple, but it's more difficult than you might think. You're going to bring your palms to the floor, but I want you to do that without falling and catching yourself. So as you bring your palms down, you're doing that slowly, and you're going to feel then you have to work your hips and your trunk stabilizers to be able to do that. Otherwise, you're just kind of falling and catching yourself with your hands. Try to take away all of the momentum from the motion of bringing your hands down. And then once they're down, walk forward and go back to the kneeling plank for a moment here. And you want to feel like you're really opening up the low back here with your breath. So breathe into the abdominal area, move the intra-abdominal pressure posteriorly, and completely unload the lumbar spine and the lumbar spinal muscles. Meanwhile, keep the head lifted, shoulder blades down. Breathe into the back. And then from there, carefully, gradually, start to squat back. Now, as you do this, if you feel resistance, if you feel a catch, you feel like if you keep going, you're going to hurt yourself, then don't. Just pause where you feel the resistance. Reactivate the lower abdominal muscles. Breathe into that. Open that area up. That should take the pressure from your back into your hips. And then once it's back in the hips, then you shouldn't feel any resistance from your back to increase the flexion in your hips and deepen your squat. The idea here is not to use this as a forward bend in the sense of rounding your low back. The idea here is to do a forward bend in your hips, but keep your spine neutral. Right, and then come forward. Come up into bear. So you start with the knees bent here in bear. You stabilize your low back once again, and then gradually stretch your legs into downward facing dog. There again, if you feel like there's a catch, if you feel like there's a place that resists when you stretch your legs, you can keep your knees bent. You want to let your body give you permission to go further and not try to force anything. And bend the knees so you're back in bear. And from there walk in and do one more squat just briefly. Make sure in your squat that you're uprighting the pelvis enough to take the tension out of your low back, or at least any hypertension out of your low back. And then come all the way up to standing from there. Now you'll need a hand support, block or 2 blocks. You're going to set that up. And then go into your forward bend. Initially, don't reach for the hand support. Try to go down like you did earlier. Use your abdominal muscles and your intra-abdominal pressure and that adjustment of the position of the pelvis, alignment of the pelvis, to support your low back. And highlight here the stretch from the hips and hamstrings. Then when you feel like you're at that initial end range where you start to feel like you're not quite able to go further for the moment, then bring your hands to the support, and then you can verify that you've given yourself enough height. See that you're not leaning into the support with your body weight, but rather use it to help keep the head uprighting and as something to push into actively so you can activate your trunk stabilizers and stabilize your lower back. And then try to go lower by tipping the pelvis more and stretching the hamstrings and the hips more rather than by stretching your back. Even when you reach the point where the lumbar spine does start to flex, does start to bend forward a little, it should still feel like most of the stretch is coming from the legs and hips. Very, very active legs here. You want the kneecaps pulled up. You want the quadriceps working to keep the thigh bones stable, keep the thigh bones moving to the hamstrings. Keep the knees fully extended. And then again, you're pushing down, uprighting the head, activating the lower trunk, and trying to lift the sit bones a little higher, tip the pelvis a little more forward. Gradually, you can hang the trunk lower that way. Then when you're ready to come up, unweight the hands, reactivate the legs, and lift yourself up with your knees straight. Take whatever time you need to recover the breath. Good. So we're going to get back down onto the floor. So you can squat down into bear. And then lift one hand and turn and bring that hip down. And then you can just keep turning and go onto your back with your legs up. And breathe into your low back. And breathe into your lower abdomen. So you want this whole lower trunk area to feel that it's expanding outwards in all directions, especially into your lumbar spine. If you imagine for a moment that you had a weight in your hands and that weight was fairly heavy, and you had to push against that weight, you'll feel the activation increase. And then maintain that to keep the low back stable as you bring your feet down. So I'm going to take you through 3 of the most simple forward